Wait, so that's the opening? It's going to be hard, I think, to connect that with what you want us to actually talk about.
Well, I mean, we're talking about education. It feels appropriately dystopian.
I've spent the better part of 2020 trying to integrate all manner of suffocating digital activities into my life, grappling with the peculiar breed of screen-induced claustrophobia they induce. Most live experiences still remain tantalizingly out of reach, and as a result, there are few artistic endeavors untouched by this online adaptation. One of the deepest virtual incursions has been in the realm of education. Naturally, the music world followed suit, and a veritable cottage industry of digital educational material began to take shape. In my less charitable moments, it seemed as though this stuff had all the aesthetic depth and richness of a training video from some kind of chain restaurant. Everything was suddenly fragmented, broken into individuated monads. Easy to learn, the video clip titles would decry. Easily digestible. Learn music theory in 30 minutes. Or was it 5 minutes? I can't remember. And who cares? Okay, fair enough. Anyone can make a video teaching you a scale. God love him for doing it. But surely there's more to this thing of ours than just the fingering for D major. No. This virtual turn summoned something else, something latent. I grant that all fields of inquiry involve the exploration of smaller units of study. But this particular fragmentation, one so perfectly tailored to our impoverished attention spans, has breathed life into a kind of pedagogical golem, roaming the land with its crude literalism and small-mindedness. Cruel, you no doubt are calling me, but this is no personal attack. No. This is a collective crisis. We are none of us free from blame. Just as the mythical golem of Prague, ours was animated in pursuit of self-preservation, not malice. As artists and educators, we are all desperate to remain active, to remain relevant, be remembered even. Now, you might be asking yourself, to what degree was this penchant for the piecemeal with us already? It is certainly an effective way into the complex, but I'm starting to feel a pervasive anxiety about the facility with which it can be assembled and disseminated. It all feels a little too tidy. I needed to rewind, go back before the pandemic, get some context. So I reached out to an old friend and longtime collaborator, Laura Reed, asking, what's wrong with the way we taught music in the first place?
Lies. I think lies. I think
lying is the
lying.
What are the lies about?
I mean, I think lying has a moral association to it or something. So, it's not the best word, but there's a certain reduction of reality that has to happen to even start.
Do you think that there's a sense in which that kind of, let's call it a necessary occlusion, which especially, I understand, you have a 6-year-old, you can't convey to them the severity of reality all at once. But do you think that this occlusion goes on way too long and suddenly infects the sort of later development of artists generally.
I do think that there's a sense of idealism. So I think at the beginning that occlusion or the lying or the
Yeah.
is more technical. You know, it's more about this is how it's done, even though you know as a player that, you know, except for this way time and oh, but there you do this differently and no. That's how you hold this finger. You know, you just have to say that, you know. The violin bow is always parallel. You know, it's you know, but I think as people develop more, then the idealism or the reductiveness starts applying to other things. I think it's about trying to make sense of a very chaotic reality by imposing structure and a grid and straight lines and percentages, and in a way that can make us feel more productive, more accomplished, you know, feels like it ties it up for us.
What is a way that you could envision approaching teaching that would incorporate or at least refer to this grand chasm of questions and answerless paths that lay forward?
Taking away the idea of an all-knowing teacher and having, you know, the relationship of an all-knowing expert versus someone who knows nothing. I think just humanizing the process in making it messier.
Yes, messier is the key. To humanize isn't only about expanding dignity and respect. It is about acknowledging the tremendous nonlinearity of our reality. No clean starts and ends. Contradictions abound. Ours is an experience of instability, incoherence, and all that fun, spooky action at a distance. A real mess. How then do we so rigidly compartmentalize the arts? It is, after all, art that screams out against the void. Art that longs to articulate the ineffable, asking questions we didn't know we had, or questioning the answers we clung to like grim death. It is this intrinsic quality that captures us in the first place and drives us to pursue art. I think this is palpable to even the youngest among us. All you need do is ask them and you'll get quite an earful. Furthermore, I like this acknowledgement that at a fundamental level, education is a dialogue. One needs an interlocutor on both sides of that coin. This is all starting to sound a little Socratic, so I can't resist checking in with my personal philosopher and close friend Quinn Gibson.
What has happened from driving education completely online, for the most part? What has that exposed?
Oh, geez. Well, a number of things, I think. Some of which have to do with like structural problems, certainly in the university, but also like things that I've realized personally about, like, frankly, how learning works and doesn't. The personal thing I've noticed is that, and maybe this is kind of a pessimistic message that probably won't surprise you, but you know, I've learned that in order for people to effectively learn what I'm trying to teach them, right, to internalize the set of skills that ostensibly I'm supposed to be imparting to them, there has to be the right background conditions for them to be, like, basically non-rationally attracted to the thing. And encountering it in this way just undercuts all of those conditions. Like, what I have in mind is something like, you know, maybe this is particular to philosophy in some ways because most college-age students have never encountered it before. So there's some guy, you know, me, I'm standing up there acting out vexation, basically, like, you know, for some philosophical thesis, is immensely plausible when considered against this judgment, but how do we hold it together with this judgment? And there's this objection, and I'm walking around and pulling out my hair and going, what do we think? How does this hang together? And I think the only way I can really get them to be interested in this fundamentally alien activity is to just, perform it. And that's not going to sound surprising to you, I assume, right? To act it. That vexation has to, grip them in some way. And I don't have any charisma, it turns out, in front of a screen. And, I might have thought before that what they're really interested in is the rational stuff. And I'm giving them reasons and arguments and trying to get them to sort out their, the garbage in their heads, get them to throw out false beliefs and stuff. Whereas actually that comes later. They have to be first, like antecedently attracted to the activity that's being demonstrated for them. But there's nothing attractive about watching a person on a screen pretend to be vexed.
I want to ask, what are the ways in which even some of these issues about how to excite a person, as the first step of education, how is that curtailed even prior to the pandemic by this push to professionalize and this push to create, myriad credentials and layers and steps and levels and grades and so on? How does the general shape of this increasingly almost technocratic way of education impede some of what you're talking about, let alone digital incursion of the last year?
Like, if I had to encapsulate it, I would say, I wish I didn't have to grade anybody ever again. In a way, we started down the wrong path when we invented grading, whenever that was. It's like a way of, some philosophers have a nice word for this now. They call it value capture. It's like where you invent some way of trying, like a proxy measure for something you care about, and then you just start caring about the proxy instead of the thing itself. Grades are an excellent example of this. What we want is people to learn things or have valuable experiences or whatever, and we try to measure the extent to which they've done the engaging or done the thinking or done the work or whatever, and we give them a number or a letter. But if you ask a student what they care about, if you can somehow force them to be honest, if you ask them what they care about, is it learning or is it grades? Overwhelmingly, it's grades. It's not like they're being irrational here, right? We've given them a set of incentives where, basically in order to eke out of a living for themselves, they have to be credentialed in various ways, and they're totally enculturated in this kind of bureaucratic managerial society where they look at the world and they see correctly that without credentials, they can't be quote unquote productive members of society. We do not encourage them to seek knowledge for its own sake. We encourage them to be useful in the narrow technocratic sense. And so they're not irrational. They're being superficial intellectually speaking. But that's not their fault either. And they're just pursuing the incentives that we collectively have set up for them.
The notion of teaching as an act, as a performance, that hits close to home. Not in the superficial sense of performing an instrument, but in the sense of having to convey the underlying passion that came first and ought to always come first. I agree, this is another genre of problem, from the instructional video morass that excited me at the outset. Those of us relegated to Zoom lessons no doubt feel the same charisma-less vacuousness that Quinn describes. Perhaps this loss of communicative power explains some of the more egregious retreat into straight lines that Laura was talking about earlier. I do understand, as both Laura and Quinn point out, that there is a kind of safety and comfort in projecting this graduated screen onto the complexity of reality. But I am growing disturbed by what we are discarding along the way. Perhaps the horrors of our world are growing too large and too vast in scope for us to handle psycho-emotionally. This retreat into technocracy is unsurprising. Managing a system is far easier than confronting the necessity to change one. It's no wonder our educational projects during the pandemic have become so myopic and hollowed out. They are shrink-wrapped television dinners because we are too exhausted to cook. I'll be honest, at this point, I have too many questions. Most of them very big picture. But way down on that list is this nagging distress about what to do with all this digital content. This effluent runoff from the COVID abattoir the arts has endured in the past year and a half. I really don't know what to do. I need some kind of outside consultation. The dactylic hexameters of the Oracle of Delphi have not been heard for nearly 2,000 years. Renowned for their ability to advise the lost and confused, the oracle's prophecies had the power to transform a person's perspective, leaving them elated or leaving them destroyed. As a supplicant myself, in need of such counsel and desperate for something to rupture this burgeoning paralysis, I must begin my own ritualistic journey to Delphi. I must seek out local saxophone fixture Mark de Young and his widely acknowledged proclivity for oracular wisdom. Infamous for the density of his prognostications, a reading with de Young seems appropriate, given the enormity of my crisis.
If there's a solution, I think maybe we could adopt like the Mission Impossible credo.
I'm not familiar with it.
Well, if you think about the film, The Mission Impossible.
Never saw it. Too new.
I have a feeling that you might be vaguely aware of it in terms of its societal implications, Mark, even if you haven't sat through the entire film.
It's possible. Yes, okay.
No, that is possible. But the whole point with Mission Impossible is that you're setting out to accomplish a mission which is impossible. And therein lies the rub. So the juxtaposition of purpose. If we are going to set out to accomplish something which can't be accomplished, that message, the medium, has to self-destruct. This message will self-destruct in 5 seconds. And so therefore, the mission does become possible because of the subjectivity. I mean, whoever the agent is going to inevitably, the mission is going to be altered thanks to subjectivity, chaos, romance, and budget considerations.
Let's unpack this. Follow me for just a moment. Memory is a curious thing. It is unreliable, fallible, and easily manipulated. When we remember something, we are not taken to some objective and unchanging moment in our past, but are in fact recreating it each time, growing only further removed from its original imprint. I want to suggest that this malleability of memory is crucial for our ability to learn, develop, and evolve as individuals and artists. We require the ephemeral quality of our experiences. In a strange way, we require forgetting. As artists, it is in this field of creative forgetfulness that we must find ways of bringing about the passions that motivated us to pursue the practice in the first place. When these bits and pieces of information are no longer ephemeral, by which I mean digitally captured and recorded, they can be recalled with too perfect a fidelity. In this sense, they become inhuman, uncanny, and ultimately lifeless. With no forgetting, the piecemeal cannot be digested into any kind of gestalt. De Young's injunction to have the online material self-destruct now seems obviously imperative. There's a phrase I throw around sometimes about the music that seems to satiate the expectations of the zeitgeist. I call this music that does the listening for you. Music that follows the formulas, suffices the templates, real paint-by-numbers stuff. We're dealing with a similar thing here. We have an education that does the learning for you. The lessons can be recalled at a moment's notice, and in so doing, there's no need to grapple with them subconsciously, no need to forget the initial imprint, and thus, no need to creatively remember it as you stumble towards your artistic voice. The situation only worsens when you take into account the grades and credentials we have devised to quantify one's artistic progress. The degrees do the learning for you. The grades prove your work in lieu of the experience of internalization that ought to have actually motivated. When it comes to teaching music, it is admittedly ludicrous, comedic even, to imagine telling a child learning an instrument that the life of an artist is just that, a life, ended only by death. One works on various projects, collaborates with various people in various places, and ultimately leaves behind a residue of one's mind and one's passions. If luck prevails, that residue will outlive a person's time on this earth. There is no arrival point, only death. Occluding this for the sake of rudimentary introduction seems sensible, but it quickly outlives its effectiveness. I want to take a moment to say this is no cause for despair. In fact, it ought to be liberating, a cause for hope. A life in the arts is just that, a life, not a job, not a degree, not a succinct collection of skills, nor repeatable set of activities, like some kind of Fordist nightmare. No, art resists all of those things. This ought to be liberating, but instead we retreat into our linear narrative about learning because it entices with a certainty of achievement. One of the maxims inscribed on the pillars of the Oracle of Delphi read, "Surety brings ruin." Perhaps we should meditate on that, but perhaps with greater immediacy and urgency, we should start engaging with the world as it is and get to work. It was, after all, the Maharal of Prague who took down the golem just as he had made it. We too have this power. We can unmake the world that surrounds us, with all its cruelty, mendacity, and injustice, and build a new one. I like your setup. Look at this room.
Thanks.
There's a bass in there, and
well, even though I don't currently play that instrument, its very presence makes me feel better about so many things in the world.
You know what makes me feel better? That saxophone has no mouthpiece on it. That's progress, Mark.